What is the ideal crime? Is it conceivable? Many offenders consider every detail of their actions in an attempt to avoid being detected. Even the best laid plans must occasionally be altered by fate. The crime in today's video would have been nearly perfect if it hadn't been for one tiny detail that aided in the resolution of the case. In 2018, a young couple relocated to Carlton Street in the 8,000-person town of Salt. New York is a city in the United States. His beloved Josh Niles and Amber Washburn were present. Josh Niles was up in a large family of 5 children in Newark, Wayne County. He also fantasized of having multiple children because they got along so well. At the time of the aforementioned events, the boyfriend was 28 years old, while Amber was 4 years younger. Dated for several years before getting married. At the time, they were not legally married. Josh Niles lived in the same house as the couple's 2 children from a previous marriage. The couple raised a second child, Joshua Jr., together. Amber regarded her boyfriend's children as if they were her own and got along well with them. Her life was going swimmingly. With the money he had saved, the man was preparing to start a small lawn care business. His sweetheart was taking care of the family, had children, was about to start working, and was looking for jobs. Things were looking up for the couple to marry and enjoy a happy marriage. This story, however, would not have a pleasant ending. Josh Niles left his house around 2 p.m. on October 22, 2018. He was on his way to work. The man noticed another man sitting on a seat in front of his house after turning on his automobile and pulling into his driveway. The sense was that the man was waiting for him. The outsider was then contacted by Josh. Shots broke out after the two talked for a while, and both of them appeared enraged, according to neighbors who were listening attention. The stranger fatally shot Josh. Amber's car was also parked in the driveway. She was driving home when she rear-ended the house. At the same time, the assailant left her lover bleeding, ran up to the car, and called the girl's name after killing Josh. He smashed the windshield of her automobile. Everything happened pretty rapidly after the first blow to the head. So Amber, who witnessed the attack on her boyfriend, simply didn't have time to drive away, despite her best efforts. A neighbor who observed the crime dashed home. She then heard more gunshots but had no idea where they were coming from. She shut the door and hoped it would all be done soon. Then everything fell silent. As it turned out later, Josh was shot several more times by the assailant before fleeing. A terrified neighbor called 911 emergency services to report the gunfire in the vicinity. Patrol cops arrived almost promptly after a few minutes. Josh's body was recovered beside their vehicle. His chest had been shot several times. Amber's car was found further down the road. It had been traveling rearward until it came to a halt. Her owner was also deceased, and her 4-year-old son, Joshua Jr., was sitting in the back seat eating McDonald's nuggets. He youngster was autistic and couldn't understand what had happened, but the sound of gunfire terrified him. What is most important is that he was alive. Surprisingly, neither the house nor the car included the other children. How could they have escaped? It was then discovered that the children were safe and at school. When the crime scene was examined, approximately 13 spent gunshot casings were located. Josh got 12 gunshot wounds as well, while Amber had 1 fatal headshot. The attacker's rage was clearly directed at the man, and Amber may have unintentionally observed the incident. As a result, she was also disposed of. The vast majority of witnesses had no idea there had been a gunshot. They thought it looked like fireworks were being set off. However, some of the witness testimony was really useful. Witnesses described the attacker. He was dressed in a green headgear and black attire. Unfortunately, seeing his face from a distance was impossible. It was further covered. The perpetrator used the backyards of surrounding homes to flee the site of the crime. He did not own a car. Investigators began searching for and reviewing CCTV footage from the neighborhood. They also began questioning anyone who could have seen a man who looked like him sprinting through someone else's backyard. Due to a lack of information about the perpetrator's intentions, the decision was made to close the neighbouring school. Police dispatched search dog teams. They suspected that the sought offender was still close. The assailant was not found despite several hours of searching. The dogs led the cops to a lonely parking lot where the tracks divided. The suspect most likely hopped into a car and drove away, leaving no trace for the dogs to follow. Only a ski mask was found in a trash can in the parking lot, according to detectives. When the victim's neighbours were questioned, they admitted to seeing a man running in a similar mask. He was also wearing a cowl over his face, obscuring any facial features. This person was seen wandering about the area before the event. He appeared to be meticulously stalking someone. The residents were all afraid. Nothing like this had ever happened in their peaceful, lovely village. They were concerned about other people because the culprit was still at large. However, investigators were confident that this was a targeted act, that the perpetrator posed no danger to others. Police personnel attempted to reassure the people and admitted that, in order to preserve citywide safety, it was critical to first find and catch the offender. The investigators concluded that this was not a random incident. It was a preemptive strike against selected individuals. Josh had associated with the perpetrator, so he knew Amber's name. In addition, the perpetrator was a good shooter because he shot Amber the first time. Who, however, would wish to harm this young couple? The detective began searching the young family's social network for prospective possibilities. Josh's ex-wife, Charlene Albert, and her husband, Timothy Dean, were the first to suspect. Josh and Charlene's first marriage did not work out. Josh, 18, was introduced to Charlene by a mutual acquaintance. When Charlene's home life grew difficult, she moved in with her lover and his parents after they began dating right. In July of 2009, they had a daughter. They married and purchased a home for themselves. 5 years later, a second kid was born. When they shared a house, their relationship was rough and unpleasant. Josh was stubborn, and Charlene was always provoking fights. They frequently battled. Charlene and her children moved to the Texas town of Sunray when the couple divorced. After their divorce, they had a bitter custody struggle. Each spouse wanted sole custody and were unable to reach an agreement. Charlene weed her. James Childers almost immediately after moving to Texas, but their marriage quickly ended in divorce. Charlene and Tim Dean bonded after that, and they eventually married. He acted like a normal abuser by raising his hand on her and the children. Tim Dean, it was discovered, had physically abused the girl who lived with Charlene immediately before the incident. The daughter refused to eat one day and put it on the record of the new wife, who ignored it. The woman published the footage on her social media profile, which alerted the child's father. Josh reported it to the police, who performed an investigation that validated this information. Tim was arrested and accused with child abuse. On this basis, the ex-spouse's children were returned to their father Josh in New York. Josh had every reason to believe he would be granted full custody. Given the facts of Tim's assault and his inaction, Josh and the kids' life appeared to be improving until October 2018, when their blood was spilt. Because the only individuals in disagreement with the dead were the former spouses who were fighting over child custody. Police officers kept a tight eye on them. The investigators contacted Charlene. She couldn't have been involved in the attack on the couple in theory because she was in another Texas state at the time. The woman became aware of the situation after receiving a social media notification. She claims that when she opened the news, she saw reports about the attack, the victims, and the police search. Charlene was worried about her children and relieved to find that they were safe. The woman argued that she was not the perpetrator of the act. After all, she was as far away from the incident. Charlene was removed off the suspect list after her alibi was confirmed. The victim's family, Joshua and Amber, were stunned to learn of the murder. They quickly provided important information to the police. The family suspected Charlene, Josh's ex-wife, and her husband were involved since they frequently clashed and threatened them about the children. Charlene wasn't completely ruled out because the family was certain that no one else could have committed the crime, and it was clear that this was a personal attack. During this time, forensic investigators meticulously examined the crime scene and began to draw the dots between the data they had gathered. They were acquainted since the victim and the shooter had a communication before to the incident. Amber's name was also known to the criminal because neighbours saw the killer waiting for the couple. Police detectives were inclined to assume that this was a premeditated homicide. There were 12 bullets fired at the dead, but nothing was taken. The perpetrator behaved with clarity his intention being murder. Charlene Albert, the victim's ex-wife, was an important witness for the police. Josh's neighbours and friends were complimentary of him and his fiancée. They had just recently moved into the neighbourhood, but they had always been friendly and hospitable. However, the dead man's weakness was discovered by his ex-wife. He was viewed as unstable and capable of utilising physical aggression while arguing by her. She also stated that he had a substance abuse problem. The cop overt evidence to back up his statements. Relevant documents in the archives revealed that he had smoked cigarettes when he was younger. Despite this, Charlene remained on the side of her children's father. She was enraged that someone had taken away their family guy because of her testimony regarding the chemicals. The investigators had discovered new leads. After all, a person suffering from severe addictions could have made touch with the underworld. The shooting could have been a drug-related brawl. Perhaps he owed a lot of money to dealers. These rumours, however, were not validated. A toxicological investigation revealed that the murdered couple's remains contained no alcohol or drugs. The deceased's loved ones denied having taken anything. There were no evidence of drugs in their residence. The authorities discovered that the murdered had no connections with the drug dealers after reviewing their correspondences and phone calls. As a result, they were persuaded that this version was just unworkable. The police continued to investigate the victim's immediate surroundings. Except for Charlene and her new husband, Tim, no one else was suspicious. All the threads led back to Charlene and Tim, whom she married in 2018. That is when they began investigating the man and his suspected involvement in the crime. Tim and Charlene actually met while working on a project in Texas. Charlene was divorced and working for a stray animal trapping service at the time, while Tim worked for the police department. A romance developed between the two right away. Tim was described as a belligerent person with a violent past, which led some to accuse him of murder. Furthermore, his relationship with Charlene, who had a history of child abuse, painted him in a terrible light. Surprisingly, Tim Dean previously served as police chief in Texas before being dishonorably discharged following an incident involving children. As a result of his destroyed reputation, he found it extremely difficult to find new employment, eventually getting a job as a fast-growing food delivery guy. At the same time, reports spread that Tim held a strong desire for vengeance following his expulsion from the police department. Naturally, he was hostile toward Joshua, who had caused him problems. Concurrently, Josh and Amber were given the opportunity to reclaim custody of their children from prior marriages. Despite the fact that a pending court case could potentially resolve the custody dispute, Charlene was not about to give up lightly. She intended to take her ex-husband to court in order to obtain the children. In August 2018, she travelled to a New York court where she discovered that she would not regain custody while being married to a guy suspected of violence. She promised to divorce Tim for the sake of the children, which heightened detectives' interest in Tim. It was revealed that he had not only lost his career, but also faced the possibility of losing his spouse, home, and everything he had worked for over the years. Tim may have intended to harm Josh and his fiancée in order to exact revenge and win full custody of Charlene's children. Furthermore, he had no alibi at the time of the murder, making him the primary suspect in the case. However, rather than mere suspicion, concrete evidence was necessary to arrest and charge him. To gather more information, the cops got a search warrant and wiretapped Tim's phone records, which revealed important information. He was involved in an automobile accident 400 kilometers away from New York City while driving a rental car. It was discovered just before the shooting. This occurrence occurred in Kansas, which Tim Dean had visited. Although his reason for being there so quickly remained unknown, these developments heightened suspicions about him. During the crash, police officials examined Tim's automobile and discovered no psychotropic substances on him. They did, however, uncover a shotgun and ammunition in the trunk. Tim was able to avoid arrest since he had a legal firearms permit and escaped with the help of an Uber cab. The incident was originally ignored, but following the attack, detectives traced the rental car back to the mechanic who had towed it after the accident. The mechanic was interviewed and revealed that multiple magazines, caliber ammunition, a shotgun, and a non-armoured shooting vest were discovered in the trunk of the car. Tim Dean stated he was going to New York to check on a distant relative, a tale based on witness testimony and vehicle rental company CCTV footage. The main suspect was discovered to have visited multiple similar establishments, but only managed to rent a car from one. His use of cash, which was hesitantly accepted, drew its attention, which he had previously been denied. Later, the driver was seen driving the rental automobile near a store in New York City, heightening suspicions. He attempted to conceal his movements by hiring a car rather than driving his own, but traces from the collision led to the discovery of his true name, providing the police with adequate reasons for arrest and further investigation into Tim's involvement in the murder. Tim Dean was captured and brought to the police station to be questioned. During the interview, the suspect told an incredible narrative. Tim, he claims, began on a difficult journey in an attempt to reconnect with his separated spouse. He flew to New York State to meet with her uncle in the hopes of rekindling their romance. Despite the obvious coincidences, denied any knowledge of the crime victims. Because there was inadequate proof and Tim maintained his innocence, the investigators' worries were not substantiated. As a result, he was released by law enforcement. However, the detectives continued to dive into the case's information. Tim Dean was discovered to have rented the car under a different name, Brown Boha, a friend and former police colleague from Texas. As a result, Brown was interrogated, initially denying knowledge of Tim's plans and claiming that he had only done a favour for a friend. The detectives, on the other hand, suspected Brown of not being totally truthful. They informed Brown that if he concealed critical information despite being aware of the circumstances, he would be labelled an accessory and would face harsh penalties. If Tim was found guilty, Brown eventually caved to pressure and revealed the specifics of a scheme to commit a double murder at Tim Dean's house. The execution had been precisely prepared by the two experienced cops in order to escape notice and dodge culpability for the killings. Their plan included arranging for Tim to have a car, which they chose to rent from a friend. They planned to remain anonymous by omitting Tim's name from the paperwork. The plan almost worked since the ex-cop intended to travel through various states to avoid identification. However, the accident derailed their plans. Another conspirator was Charlene, the deceased man's ex-wife, who was motivated by a desire for vengeance. After losing custody of her children in court, she became the mastermind behind the crime. Charlene and Tim were both in the same condition. According to Brown's evidence, Tim wanted to get rid of Josh and Amber because he thought it would open the way for a better future. She also provided funds to hire a second car using her credit card because Tim only had cash on hand, which was not accepted by Kansas companies. Her involvement in the crime became clear after she departed the scene of the accident. Tim, Brown and Charlene were caught 2 weeks after the double murder. Tim was charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, murder conspiracy, and unlawful possession of a weapon. Charlene was charged with manslaughter and unlawful weapon possession, while Brown was charged as an accessory after the fact. Charlene confessed and collaborated with authorities in the hopes of earning a lower sentence. Although her cooperation was insignificant, because the detectives already had substantial evidence, her testimony was critical. It should be emphasized that her attempts to discredit the children's deceased father, Josh, were futile. Except for his ex-wife, who plainly had a vested interest in portraying him adversely, no one else portrayed him unfavorably. Tim, the gunman, insisted on his innocence until the very end. His defense, however, was insufficient, and he was eventually convicted guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in jail without the chance of parole. Tim maintained a calm demeanour throughout the trial, expressing neither guilt or regret and declining to communicate with the victim's family. Brown Bola was sentenced to 3 years in prison as an accessory after the fact, but was released after serving only 16 months. Charlene, who was also found guilty, was sentenced to 28 years in jail for her assistance with the authorities, which was significantly less than the maximum penalty. In 2042, she will be eligible for release. Charlene's sister was granted custody of Josh and Charlene's 2 children, while Amber's parents were granted custody of their deceased daughter's autistic child. As a result, the grandparents were forced to learn how to care for a special needs youngster, If you enjoyed my work, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. I also recommend that you view these videos. Thank you all and good luck.